now we're going to start very controversial part of the course. You know, when I was talking to one of you, he said, well, of course, we will have no time to discuss religion in this class. And he was very wrong. You cannot possibly discuss Western civilization, our civilization, without discussing religion. As a matter of fact, I'm wrong. You can, since most people do. The assumption is that you don't have to know anything in order to have an opinion. But it's actually important to know what our civilization represents, where the values which we share come from, where the stories, again, I repeat, which we know come from. If you go to, say, Florence and look around, you see statues of all kinds of strange people. The largest statue in Florence happens to be of a certain naked guy. This is David, who was not an Italian. So why would be his statue in Florence? So what does it signify? Unless you understand it, you know, you cannot fully enjoy the full view of his private parts, which are not anatomically correct. Observe that. So if you want to go and listen to Handel's oratorios, whether it's Jephthah, whether it's Judas Maccabeus, you need to know what these stories are about, or you will be lost. Handel, by the way, was a great composer. We'll get to him when we talk about England. And if you read, say, Dickens, you will not be able to understand many of the fundamental themes in Dickens unless you know certain fundamental thing which transpired. So what we will have to do, and it's a very difficult thing now, because we live in the society which is totally illiterate in terms of religion, in terms of the Bible. See, not the United States. Yes, United States. And there are multiple reasons for that. Rather complicated. First of all, of course, the common biblical literacy, which was here in, say, 19th century, is gone. Because people used to know certain stories because they were taught at schools. Now they are no longer taught. It is a common perception. One of my friends here said, but Alex, you cannot talk about that. HR will not allow it. So the assumption is that even mentioning the Bible would cause some reaction from human resources. Let me assure you, the Constitution still allows us to talk about the Bible. And of course, our HR is above Constitution, but I'll take my chances. So what we have right now is, you know, we have two parts of the population. One of them already know without ever reading the Bible that it's a bunch of superstitious nonsense and only very stupid people could take it seriously. The same person who told me about this thing about HR once remarked that all Christians are fundamentally stupid. As far as I know, he knows two Christians. His advisor, Don Knuth, and me. And while I will sort of say maybe Don is stupid, but, you know, so, but he's certain that it is indeed the fact that, you know, Christians are these narrow-minded, uneducated people who know nothing at all about anything. By the way, are there Christians like that? Yes, but there are atheists like that, there are Hindus like that, there are Muslims like that, there are even Jews like that. So I don't think it's a necessary thing to sort of, but, bigotry is a powerful thing. People keep telling me how stupid Muslims are, that they never created anything. And what they do not understand, that they parrot exactly what was told about their ancestors by the Romans. The first encounter between the Jews and so-called civilized world, actually, which recorded on the part of the civilized world, appears in Tacitus. Tacitus was a great Roman historian who was writing somewhere at the turn of the 1st century. So he died probably somewhere around 116 AD. And he sort of heard about the Jews. Again, there's this common assumption that everybody knew about the Jews. But as we noticed, Plutarch, who was roughly his contemporary, knew that they were people who were worshipping Dionysus. So in case of Tacitus, he knew a little bit more. Let us see what he knew. Okay, so you probably never looked, but let us do it and see what could people say about other religions. First, he says that there are different conjectures where they came from, but the reliable scientific opinion that there were a bunch of lepers in Egypt. And when they were expelled, as lepers should be, they didn't know what to do and almost perished from the lack of water, possible in the desert. And then they saw a bunch of wild asses and followed them to a spring and got water. And this is why they do venerate donkey's head. It's a very reliable information that Jewish religion is centered on the veneration of donkey's head. By that time, they actually knew that it wasn't quite like that. Pompey went inside the Holy of Holies and didn't find anything, which was a shocking thing. I mean, they were venerating something worse than As's head. They were venerating nothing. But the attitude was that these were lepers, and then there was this guy called Moses, that's the spelling Tacitus uses, who organized them and gave them, the laws by which they live. And the whole point of the laws was to make them as inhuman and as wild, as uncivilized as possible. And let me just give you a couple of little pieces. Among themselves, they are honest and never ready to show compassion, though they regard the rest of mankind with all the hatred of enemies. They sit apart at meals, they sleep apart, and though as a nation they are singularly prone to lust, they abstain from intercourse with foreign women. Among themselves, nothing is unlawful. So, okay. What is the lesson of all of that? There is a historical lesson that at the time of Tacitus, Jews was universally viewed as disdained as a wild, uncivilized nation with very bad customs. I mean, genital mutilation. We know it's not a good thing to do. They wouldn't eat any tasty food like shrimp, and so on and so forth. And they would resist at all cost the civilizing influence. That's what was universally thought of them. What is the lesson for today? when you talk about other people's religion, restrain yourself. Yes? Tacitus was wrong. And so are you when you say something about Mormons, Muslims, whatever else unfavorite group. Again, a good thing to do for all of us is try to find something good about people who do not share your beliefs. There's usually a lot to learn. I'm yet to find a group of people from whom I cannot learn. So, but now, why I want to start with this thing, why is so important to show you what was thought of the Jews in the year, say, 116? Because there is this remarkable fact that in exactly 200 years, the Emperor of Rome, all-powerful Constantine, would declare a Jewish Messiah to be his Lord. You say, well, but Jews didn't recognize him. Besides the point, we have to explain this remarkable thing. So how come, in a very short period of time, something which was viewed as a, pernicious religion becomes an imperial religion of the greatest empire in the world? And how come the people from whom this religion comes reject it totally? Right? It's historically amazing fact, but it is a fact. So what I will have to do right now, I will have to take a detour and talk a little bit, since again I will have to assume that you know nothing about the Bible, because that's my experience with talking with people, to give you some idea what it is, what it came from, and what Jews actually believed at different points of their development. Again, by the time we're talking about the Bible existed in two versions. Of course, there existed a Hebrew Bible, which some Jews read. And there existed a much more popular Greek translation called Septuagint, because majority of Jews at that point couldn't read Hebrew. How do we know it? So, Alex, you're making it up. Well, there is irrefutable evidence of Jewish cemeteries in places like Rome. All the inscriptions are in Greek, or in Crimea, or in sort of wherever. Jews were all over the place. They had cemeteries because they believed that proper burial is an appropriate thing. And they put signs, almost never in Hebrew, almost never in Aramaic. They were Greek-speaking. There was a huge colony of Jews. The largest, probably, Jewish population was not in Jerusalem. The largest Jewish city at that time was Alexandria. Yes? Alexandria was founded, if you remember, by Alexander the Great. 300 whatever years before the time we're talking about. And Alexander, from the beginning, encouraged Jewish settlement in Alexandria. Alexander somehow loved Jews very much. So much so that he gave them, at least those of them who settled in Alexandria, a status equivalent to status of Macedonians. That's very high, not like ordinary Greeks. Macedonians, the imperial race. So lots of them moved. It was good for them. By, again, the time we're talking about, they were hated both by Egyptians and the Greeks. Why? Because they were doing well. If you do well, guess what? They don't like you. So, but at that time, the Alexandrian Jews did some remarkable things. First, long time, probably somewhere around 160, 180 BC, they arranged this translation of first the law, the first 5 books of Moses, the 5 books of Moses, into Greek, and then the entire Hebrew scriptures. This is Septuagint, the translation of the 70. The legend was that when Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, wanted to obtain the translation of the Bible, why would he want to do it? I do not know, but that's how the legend goes. He invited 70 educated Jews from Jerusalem who knew both Hebrew and Greek. And he asked them to go in different rooms, not to communicate, and translate the book. They did in 70 days. 70 people in 70 days makes perfect sense. And guess what? They were identical, which clearly showed that even the translation is inspired. So Septuagint, at least at that time, had a very, very high authority among the Greek-speaking Jews, which were probably a large majority of all the Jews. So many Alexandrian Jews started to think, and that was for the first time, they started reading books of other nations, say Plato, and try to reconcile, find a way of sort of fusing this wisdom of the nations with the revealed truth, what they believed revealed truth, which they had. And the sort of the most important figure from whom we have lots of things left is Alexandrian philosopher Philo of Alexandria, I think he was an Alexandrian philosopher, who attempted to sort of come with a synthesis. He was not a great philosopher, but it was a brave attempt. And later on, extremely popular among the Christians, totally ignored by the Jews after some point. So there was a major attempt to become a world religion, at least by some Jews. They wanted to present themselves as a part of this civilization. They also came up with all kind of apocryphal stories about how all these wise people were taught by the Jews. How Plato went to Judea and learned everything he knows from the Jews. How Aristotle, do I have to go through the list? Basically, all of them learned from the Jews. These are nice stories. There's absolutely no evidence of that. But again, later on, even Christians sort of used this as a proof that there was some profound influence of Jewish religion on the Greeks. There is no evidence of that whatsoever. So that's the state at that point. But again, what is this book, the Bible? We have to get some idea where it's coming from. And it's hard for us to know precisely because the evidence is scanty. Sort of the Bible appears almost as a whole right at that time. We know that it existed prior to that, but it's hard to find. The manuscript evidence does not go there. And even archaeological evidence of sort of stories in the Bible is not there. In some sense, historically we know that there was a kingdom of Judea and probably kingdom of Israel, 2 kingdoms, side by side, the northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Judea, and northern kingdom disappears totally, taken by Syrians, and seemingly no trace are left. Of course, Samaritans, who still exist, claim to be the descendants, but it's not clear. And then they eventually, Babylonians, at the very beginning of the 6th century, conquer Jerusalem, destroy all the religious buildings, the temple, nothing is fundamentally left, and take the Jews, or at least the Jewish management, the educated classes, to Babylon. So famous Babylonian captivity. So it is likely that that was the most creative, again, here, while most scholars do believe that, I'm entering the area of conjectures. That the greatest literary period for the Jews was precisely the captivity. And it's easy for me to believe. Because when you live in your state, you don't care about codifying your legacy. Now your state is destroyed. You carried whatever artifacts with you. Not much. I mean, the Babylonians were not particularly keen on you sort of carrying much. But you carried. So I think that there was a major scribal activity during the captivity and right after, but to codify what we right now view as Hebrew scriptures. Then Babylonian Empire collapses. King Cyrus, Persian, defeats Babylonians, defeats everyone. I mean, this is the next world empire, is Persian Empire, and he looks very, very sympathetically on the Jews. Not just on the Jews. We suspect that he probably looks well on all captive nations. His idea is to let everybody go to their places, none of this shuffling around nations which Babylonians and the Syrians were doing. So let them all go back and prosper under the king of the world, sort of. He lets Jews go. We are a little bit confused in what order Jews go, because there is Zerubbabel who goes, there is Nehemiah who goes, there's Ezra who goes, who is before whom is not quite clear. There are just historical uncertainties, but eventually Jews come back, rebuild Jerusalem somewhat, rebuild the temple somehow. It's not a major great architectural monument at that point, and start living as good subjects of a Persian empire. We do not know of any tensions between Persians and the Jews, but again, they're not noticeable at all. Think about it. Herodotus doesn't mention them. None of the Greek historians even notice their existence. So it's a small group barely surviving. Then, of course, in around 320 BC, Alexander the Great defeats Persians. And Jews welcome him. As far as we know, Alexander becomes a popular Jewish name, even till today. But it's a Greek name, but accepted. Then what happens is that the empire of Alexander, the Great Empire, splinters after his death. He dies young, 33 years old. Empire is splintered in multiple parts, eventually becomes 3 parts. And this part of the world is between 2 Macedonian empires, between Ptolemies in Egypt and Seleucids in Syria. For a while they're part of Egyptian Ptolemy Empire, and there are not major tension there. There are some major persecution of the Jews in Egypt, because there are many Jews now settled in Egypt, but nothing in Judea itself. Ptolemies ignore pretty much Jewish population in Judea, but then eventually, the Syrian Empire, Seleucids, conquer Judea. And they say, well, we cannot let it be. I mean, these people are not civilized. They don't have civil rights. They don't have water supply. They don't have anything. So we need to build schools and stadiums and let them exercise. And many upper-class Jews really love it. Many rural and less educated Jews resent it. They say, we are not going to run naked. That's indecent. That's against our religion. So they start rejecting that. They clearly do not want to read Plato. I mean, those people who don't want to be educated. So there are all kinds of cultural missions attempting to convert these wild people. Not very successful. The upper aristocracy listens. I suspect the high priests listen. But the rural priests do not. And at some point around, say, 160 BC, a rural priest called Matthias decides to start a rebellion. And it starts a long rebellion. It goes on for many years. Not very successfully, in spite of the sort of stories. It takes a long time for them to establish themselves, and the reason they manage to do it is because, again, Egyptians start fighting Syrians again, and eventually Jews could reestablish their self-rule somewhere around 150. And these rural priests established themselves as high priests. So there is this new dynasty, high priestly dynasty, not quite legitimate because they are not Zadokite priests. They do not, as of Zadok, who they're supposed to be. And but they do establish some rule, lasts about 80 years. Not very successfully. They become quite corrupt quickly. And then Romans come and conquer them without any sort of, nobody even notices. And they establish a new Jewish kingdom under Idumean rulers, not Jews, or half Jews, or somewhat Jews. The most famous of whom you heard is Herod the Great. He was not actually Jewish. So he and his dynasty rule for quite a while, altogether close to 60 years. Then eventually Rome takes more and more direct rule. And in around in the mid-60s, around 66, Jews decided to rebel and establish their independence, the first great Jewish war. It's a tragic story. They were bound to lose. Everybody in their right senses knew that they were going to lose. They might have been calculating on the fact that things in Rome were pretty bad. Nero was at the end of his rule. Then there was interregnum, so they might have thought that it would be possible to win. No. They had some capable military commanders. Flavius Josephus is one of them. Sadly enough, this military commander turned out to be a turncoat, and rather shameful turncoat. He betrays the Jewish cause and becomes a collaborator with the Romans. But because of that, we have something we know about the war, because he survives and he is a friend of Emperor Vespasian and Emperor Titus, son of Vespasian. So he writes a famous book called The Jewish War, which gives us first-hand, very biased account. Again, one of the most disgusting stories is the story of, which he narrates fairly directly, quite directly, about how he escaped during the siege. He commands a fortress, and they're hiding in a cave with a bunch of other guys, and they come with the resolution to kill themselves, other than giving themselves away. And he gives this speech saying, well, we shouldn't kill themselves. They don't listen. He said, well, he gives another beautiful speech, it's all recorded, where he said, well, we should kill themselves, but in the following way. We throw a lot, and one who wins kills the other, and so on. Somehow he is the last to throw the lot. So after everybody but him and one more person are left, he convinces the last person not to kill themselves. If you ever do it, do not write it in your autobiography. So it's not a nice story, but he survived. He's a very peculiar guy, but the book is very interesting, and at least one passage, which I think is very important for further events, I will have to quote. Again, those of you who want to read it, that's the translation. It's not a recommended book in the sense it's not part of any large canon or small canon. Nevertheless, the Penguin edition is probably the easiest to handle. And the passage which I am going to read you, which I find so very fascinating, is the passage about different sects among the Jews. He says that there are 3 sects among the Jews: Sadducees, Pharisees, and Essenes. And then he talks a little bit about Sadducees and Pharisees, about whom we know from other sources. But he gives a long and detailed description of Essenes, of whom we basically know nothing other than from him and a little bit from Philo of Alexandria, but a very peculiar sect. So let me tell you about these 3 sects so that you at least know a little bit. So, Sadducees is a sect of high priests. This is Jewish aristocracy. They are in power. They control the temple. And at that time, the religion of the Jews is centered around the temple. Sort of temple sacrifices are central. And people who control the sacrifices are, of course, very powerful and very rich. So their attitude to life is, first of all, they reject everything except the 5 books of Moses. All other scriptures are of no importance, maybe should be suppressed. Second, they do not believe like rich people, at any time, they do not believe in all this punishment after death. That does not exist, obviously. Enjoy it while you can, especially if you have money. So they are totally against immortality of the soul in any sense. And the interesting fact, they are pro-Roman, because Romans fundamentally accommodate them. They accommodate Romans. Things are good. Rome protects the ruling class everywhere, including Judea. Sadducees, Pharisees. These are the party of lawyers, people who study Jewish law day and night. They are very separate from Sadducees. They organize their alternative worship sites. There is a temple for Sadducees. There are synagogues, schools for Pharisees, where they study the law day and night. To study the law day and night, you also need to have some money. So they are not exactly poor. And they clearly have a certain disdain for people of the land. Am Haaretz, the people of the land, they are not worth much. And they, quoting from Josephus, they believe in reincarnation. There is this notion that, Judeo-Christian idea of eternal punishment. Well, whatever it is, they're like Buddhists, according to Josephus. And by the way, if you talk to modern rabbis, they are even now. So the belief in the reincarnation is central to Orthodox Judaism, which is direct successor of Phariseeism. These are, if you like, Hasidim of old. And then comes this amazing third party, Essenes. They're very different from anything we have seen in Judaism. And according to Josephus, they're widespread throughout Judea. They live in these communities where, of course, there are no women, or at least in the main part of Essenes, lead life without women because, women cannot really lead virtuous life. It's not mine, it's Josephus. So they live without women. They lead a very monastic existence. And I emphasize the word because later on I will argue that this text in Josephus is going to influence the development of Christian monasticism. So, it's not just a coincidence. So they wake up very early, they dress in white habits, none of the other things. They use mikvah every morning to wash themselves. Then they eat, as far as I could determine, twice a day. This is what Josephus says, but other sources. In common. This is, if you like, Spartan life. They sort of observe Sabbath unlike any other sect of Jews. They're very, very strict. And they view the rest of the Jews as fundamentally unclean. It takes, if somebody wants to join them, it takes at least 2 years before they are fully admitted into the fold. So it is a strange monastic thing. And then at the end, he praises them highly as people who would sort of survive any torture Romans would inflict on them. Apparently, not many of them survive the Jewish war. All the rumors. For 2,000 years, most people actually believed that Josephus made it all up. No evidence anyplace. And then, after the war, in the 1940s, some Palestinian Bedouins found some writings, Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's apparently what now most scholars believe is what left from Essenes. We do not know for a fact, again. This is a conjecture which is widely believed, probably correct. But it shows that there existed a very interesting and fairly major branch of Judaism which utterly disappeared. So did Sadducees. There is nothing at all left from Sadducees. let me finish, since I cannot tell you everything, but let me finish what happens with the Jews. They lose the war. In 1970, in the 70s, Titus takes Jerusalem, the temple is burned, lots of people are slaughtered. Again, according to Josephus, it's all the fault of crazy Jewish leadership, whom he describes as ISIL-style terrorists. Again, this is not me, that's the source. I never met any of them, so I have no personal opinion. But apparently fanatical, crazy people, and leads to total disaster. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Jews are taken as slaves. Many of them are killed and crucified throughout Judea. Terrible devastation. Josephus does very well because he's being a friend of an emperor helps. He gets pension. For a military commander to get nice pension, and by the way, Vespasian house in Rome. When the emperor gives you his old house, you're doing real well. So he clearly did very well. He boasts about all of that. So that's why we know. But a terrible disaster. Then things start happening. In the 90s, not 1990s. In the 90s, Jews, or especially Pharisees, because these are the only people who are standing, all the radicals are killed, Sadducees are killed, mostly by radicals, not by Romans. By the time Romans come, Sadducees are all dead, the rich and the aristocracy. Essenes are probably killed by Romans, so it's the Pharisees, teachers who are left. They organize what is known now, or it's hypothetically thing, as Council of Jamnia, where they made some radical decisions. In particular, no more Greek. Basically, we will build a wall around the Torah. They start writing Talmud, which obviously there are elements of it which exist, and sort of any idea of any intercourse, I don't mean sexual intercourse, but human intercourse with Gentiles disappears. It's literally from that point till the end of 18th century. Any intercourse between Jews and anybody else stops. They no longer talk. They resurrect their language. By the way, at that point, they don't speak Hebrew. They speak Aramaic, and they did speak Greek, but it very quickly started disappearing among them. And then comes another terrible war. In around 135, another revolutionary by the name of Bar Kokhba decides that he could defeat Rome. Well, he doesn't defeat Rome. Adrian suppresses the rebellion quite brutally, but this is a very brutal rebellion. These are crazy people. These are ISIL-style people for sure. Very crazy. And as a punishment, they not just destroy the temple, which is destroyed, they totally destroy Jerusalem. They plow through it. They rename it Aelia Capitolina. And they said no Jew could come here under the penalty of death. Indeed, a terrible punishment. So now, in the next lecture, of course, we will have to see what is this book called the Bible is. Now, I know I'm slightly over time, but just give me a minute. I do not know if you have the Bible. Let me assume that you do not. I do recommend one particular edition. It's, if you like, a compromise edition. If I wanted to recommend a Bible for somebody who wants to acquire great fluency of English, I would have to recommend the authorized version, the great Americans call it King James Version. It is indeed a monument of English prose, but many of you will have difficulty reading it. It is early, it was published in 1611, long time ago. So I highly recommend a descendant of this translation, which still keeps the cadence of the language, and but it's modernized enough that at least a semi-educated person who went to college might have a chance. It's called Revised Standard Version. Now, reading the Bible with no commentaries is very difficult. The book was written many, many hundreds of years ago. So what I do recommend is a particular edition of Revised Standard Version. Mind it, what I said is Revised Standard Version, not New Revised Standard Version. There is such a translation. Unfortunately, it decided to make it gender neutral. It's a marvelous goal for some people, but the problem is, if the book says one thing, let the translation say the same thing. Say, if Peter, there was an apostle called Peter, addressing the Jews, says, men of Judea. He actually, in Greek, says men, male of Judea, because you see, women don't wander around town during the day. So now, of course, the new translation says fellow Hebrews or something like that. That might be good in some sense, but it's I recommend Revised Standard Version, which maintains whatever the original said. And the edition which I highly recommend is an Oxford Annotated Bible with Apocrypha. That's the book. It has just enough comments, a little amount. It's a little amount. It's not enough for you to become a biblical scholar, but just make it enough that you could read it. It contains more books than some of you want, but for the same price, you might as well get them. For example, our Jewish friends might learn about Maccabees. This does contain 2 books of Maccabees. Actually, it contains 4 books of Maccabees. Like the Catholic Church accepts 2 books of Maccabees as canonical. The Greek Orthodox Church accepts 3 books of Maccabees as canonical. But they put 4 just in case. They're excellent, you have it all. Yeah? So, for the same, if for some reason you don't want to read the books of Maccabees, you don't, but then you will never find out about Maccabees. Sad story, especially for the Jewish friends who want to celebrate Hanukkah. It would be good to know why they celebrate it. So, and to learn about how Maccabees communicated with Spartans and many other things which sort of narrated there. So, highly recommended. Yes, it's not, by the way, there are other good things, but if I start giving you the list of all editions, you will get confused. This is neutral edition, which many professors in secular universities, such as the Junior University, the Harvard University, and other universities, would recommend. Right? Even some seminary professors would say it's not so bad. It's considered to be moderately liberal, whatever it might mean. But again, if you want it, I do urge you to get it. So when we meet again in 2 weeks, browse through it. That's what I would much appreciate if you would know the name of the books. How many books are in the Old Testament? How many books are in the New Testament? But these are good things. We'll talk about all of that. Okay?